the international desk, where we bring you the world up to the minute. I'm Lynda Kinkade, happening right now at the iDesk. Security across Europe is being ramped up in the wake of last week's terror attacks as authorities continue to hunt for suspected accomplices. And Boko Haram's campaign of terror has affected millions of Nigerians. We'll show you the terror group's youngest victims forced to fend for themselves. Plus, the Pope braves an approaching typhoon in the Philippines to pray with hundreds of thousands still recovering from the devastation of another one. All those details right here, right now at the iDesk.
Live from CNN Centre, you're at the international desk.
The Belgian military is beefing up defences at sensitive sites across the country, including synagogues and embassies. The country is on high alert after the discovery of a potential sleeper cell that was said to be plotting attacks against the Belgian police. At least 17 people in two countries have been arrested in connection with the anti-terror operation. Belgium's defence minister says it's the first time troops have been deployed on city streets in 35 years. Now we're tracking this story from France and Belgium. Phil Black joins me live from Brussels and Jim Bitterman is reporting from Paris. First to Phil in Brussels, where Belgian authorities uncovered a terror plot to assassinate police officers. They've now deployed military to patrol the streets. What are you seeing there?
Well, Lynda, it is indeed a rare sight in recent history. Soldiers deployed on the streets of a major European city. Belgian soldiers have been positioned at key locations across the capital here, government buildings, institutions relating to the European Union, and of course key Jewish sites and institutions as well. So far, around 120 here in Brussels. A further 30 are now guarding Jewish sites in the city of Antwerp as well. So 150 total deployed today. The authorities here are talking about increasing that number in the following days. It could go as high as 300. That's all part of the current increased security posture that this country has now adopted. It will be reviewed, but it's going to be at this sort of level for at least a week. And what it does show is that despite the raids that have taken place here, the fear of an ongoing terror threat very much remains.
And Phil, the Belgium federal prosecutor said he was confident they avoided a terrorist attack after carrying out these raids. What sort of threat are they facing and what did they uncover?
Well, what they believe they prevented was this imminent potential attack or attacks. They think it could have taken place in multiple places across the country that would have targeted Belgian police officers. We saw a series of raids, some 12 in total, 13 people arrested. The most dramatic of those operations was in the town of Verviers. That was where there was a shootout between police officers and two terror suspects were killed. And it was in that town the police believe they found physical evidence backing up their theory that this operation was imminent and it was going to target, as I say, police officers either on the streets or in police stations, because that's where they found AK-47s, other weapons, explosives, as well as police uniforms, documents and communications equipment, a large sum of money as well. They think this was a very well organised network. They believe they have dented it, that they have prevented this imminent threat, which they say was hours, no more than days away. But they're still staying very tight-lipped on a lot of the detail. Who these men were, those they are still holding in custody, those that were killed. They are staying quiet on these things for investigative purposes, which suggests this operation, this investigation, is still not finished, Lynda.
And thanks, Phil. And to Jim now, Jim Bitterman. Now, French authorities have arrested 12 people that had some sort of connection, they say, with Amédée Coulibaly, one of the Paris gunmen. What can you tell us about that?
Well, in fact, they rounded them up overnight from Thursday to Friday. They have been under a lock and key where they've been questioned by police since Friday. And then today, this morning, the prosecutor has allowed, as it can do in some terrorism cases, allowed that 24-hour period of questioning to be extended for another 24 hours so that the suspects can be further questioned. Now, we're not learning very much. They're tight-lipped here, just as they are up in Belgium, as Phil was saying. But there are a couple of leaks that have come out, and the reporters here are reporting that one of the suspects may have had left some DNA traces on one of the guns that Koulibaly had in his arsenal when they found their weapons cache. And another suspect apparently left some traces of DNA in the car that Koulibaly used to transport himself to the kosher supermarket where he killed 4 people and died in a shootout with police. So there is some connection there. There also may be some logistics help being provided by some of these people. In any case, no one is saying much right now why these guys are still being questioned.
Now, France, of course, has the difficult question of trying to deal with terrorism while also protecting civil liberties. What is being considered in terms of a legal response?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of contradictions here about the way the French are handling this. They are very much saying that civil liberties have to be protected in the case of Charlie Hebdo, and that the magazine should be continue to publish, and there should be freedom of press everywhere. In fact, President Hollande mentioned that today in a speech that he gave down in the south of France. But of course, they're also talking about restricting civil liberties in terms of the internet. In the same speech, President Hollande said that there would be a very tough crackdown on the internet, on internet sites that are seen to be recruiting or spreading the jihadist philosophy. So I think that there's going to be kind of a debate here about how far you can go. One of the things that did happen already is that people really rejected the idea of having something like you have in the United States, the so-called Patriot Act that came about after 9/11 in the United States. They rejected that idea, or at least certainly that name, when the legislation was being proposed in the National Assembly this week.
Tim Bitterman in Paris and Phil Black in Brussels, thanks very much for joining us. In Yemen's capital city, Sana'a, gunmen have kidnapped the president's chief of staff. Officials say ethnic Shiite rebels who virtually control the city are responsible. Our Nick paton-walsh joins us with more on that. And Nick, gunmen abducted both the chief of staff and his bodyguards. What can you tell us about that?
10 o'clock this morning or thereabouts, in the very centre of Sana'a, behind me, Dr. Ahmed bin Mubarak, the Chief of Staff to President Hadi here, taken from his car, as you said, by armed men. Followed a swift, after that, demand for his release by the British and American embassies here, condemning the abduction. And hours after that, the rebel movement here, known as the Houthis, a collection of tribes, militia, that have been sweeping across Yemen in the past months and are now in the capital city. Their checkpoints on many of the key roads said they had detained the president's chief of staff, citing their concerns that the president was soon to introduce a constitution which they had not approved, and saying that the president should be aware of the sensitivity of the moment. Really, this conflict here that had been raging in many different forms for years, but become, many concerned, increasingly sectarian, because on the face of it, the Houthis are a more broadly Shia group and pitted against a lot of the Sunni tribes here, which often includes Al-Qaeda. That conflict rapidly escalating, and today's move by the Houthis, clearly, as one Yemeni official close to the presidential administration said to me, was very much a flexing of the muscles, trying to use force to enact political change here. Some say the Houthis, as moving into the capital, have brought a calm here that hasn't seen for a while, but Al-Qaeda, it's said, are now targeting them in the capital, and there's a real sense after today's move that the presidential administration perhaps lost now in its ability to use executive power, and a real fear of perhaps some further escalation in the days ahead. Lynda.
Now, Yemen is questioning 2 Frenchmen with suspected links to Al-Qaeda. These arrests, of course, happened before the Paris attacks. What can you tell us about that?
Well, these are 2 men arrested, we were told, months ago. French men who were arrested as they tried to leave the country. We are told that they were accused and suspected of offering logistical support to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in the south of the country. Now, that suggests they weren't actually here to fight, They may have been involved in finance, anything from IT support to offering medical aid, not clear at this stage. The Yemeni official I spoke to, briefed on security matters, said that they, as I said, had been detained before the Paris attacks. That does not mean they're completely divorced from any involvement in that, of course, but it's not a reaction to what we saw in Paris. But it does show Yemeni officials keen to suggest they have eyes on Westerners leaving Yemen, and of course that would be their answer to suggestions that the failing nature of the state here has allowed an unacceptable foothold for Al-Qaeda to train people who would attack the West, Lynda.
And Al-Qaeda, of course, claimed credit for those Paris attacks. What else can you tell us about the Yemen link?
Well, the real key issue is exactly how much of a connection there was between the Kouchi brothers and Yemen here. They said they were working for a man, a US citizen now deceased, called Anwar al-Awlaki, who Al-Qaeda, in their lengthy statement, also said was the organizer of those attacks. Now, we know that the older brother, Said, was here from August 2009, in and out of the country, and then back potentially with his brother in 2011. That's when al-Awlaki, the alleged organizer of those Paris attacks, so Al-Qaeda claim, died. The key question is, do those links with Yemen stop then? When the brothers went back to France, did they cease communication and logistical assistance from Al-Qaeda in Yemen here, or did that network continue? That's what investigators clearly want to know. Of course, there is Al-Qaeda still functional here, but people aren't sure if they necessarily have those networks with European cells. If that is the case, that will be deeply troubling for Western security agencies. Lynda?
It certainly will be. Nick Paton-Walsh in Yemen, thanks for keeping us up to date. French President Francois Hollande is defending free expression after deadly protests in West Africa and elsewhere over the latest Charlie Hebdo magazine. The cover again depicts Mohammed. Demonstrators burned churches and Bibles in a second day of violence in the former French colony of Niger. 4 people were killed. Clashes also broke out in Jordan and Pakistan. High-speed train service between Britain and France has been suspended due to an apparent truck fire inside a Eurotunnel shuttle. An official says the incident is not related to terrorism, but Eurostar says train services won't resume today and advised travellers to postpone their journeys. Eurotunnel does expect to restart the vehicle and freight services later in the day. Next up, we'll look at Nigeria, where Boko Haram has been aggressively pushing its insurgency. Now, finally, leaders in West Africa could join forces to put a stop to the group. Plus, Boko Haram's wave of terror has created a new generation of children without parents, without homes, and with very little hope. Ahead, some of their heartbreaking stories in an exclusive report.